Hello again, Chris Lee of Southeastern 16 here to talk Carolina football. When we do that, we call our good friend Chris Clark of Gamecock Central to join us. Chris, thanks for joining us today. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me again, Chris.
What's the mood around South Carolina football? It's been kind of an up and down year, just a beat down of Oklahoma that if you read the box score, it makes no sense. If you watch the first 5 minutes of it, it makes total sense. How do you process everything at this point?
Yeah, to go back to that game briefly, Chris, I mean, an SEC football game is really never over in the first 5 minutes, but for all intents and purposes, that one was as close as you could possibly get, right? You go up 21-0 on the first 3 possessions, turnover on the first play for Oklahoma, pretty quick South Carolina score, and then 2 defensive scores. And you knew with the way South Carolina's defense was playing in that game, the way that Oklahoma's offense was playing in that game and had played all year, if South Carolina had done the equivalent of kneeling on the ball the rest of the game, that would have been tough, right, for Oklahoma to come back. They ended up giving up 9 sacks in the game. Pretty disastrous performance for them on offense. And then, obviously, the next day, dismissed their offensive coordinator, Seth Luttrell, with that being a big catalyst, I think the day before of that. It was a thrilling performance for South Carolina. Even coming out of that game, there was still conversation about the offense, the South Carolina offense. Obviously, their approach could be altered. They didn't have to be as aggressive. They weren't playing from behind. They didn't have to throw the ball up and down the field. You're playing against a pretty good Oklahoma defense, but that's still a concern for this team, right? What they're doing offensively. But I think that game, Chris, was really a microcosm for how it's gone for South Carolina this year. In SEC games, they had played 4 of them leading up to that game. The one on the road against Kentucky, they turned over the football once, and they were fortunate to only do that. Just the way the ball bounced, they won that game handily, right? They played defense, made a few plays on offense. The other games, though, they had 2 turnovers, 3 turnovers, 4 turnovers, right?
Yeah.
And lost 2 of those by a very close margin. So that's really been it for this team, right? They're not dynamic enough offensively to be able to, and not many teams are, right? Where you can overcome a host of turnovers. If this team, and they had no turnovers against Oklahoma, if they can play that way, they have a winning formula. If they're turning the football over, they're going to get themselves in trouble. And I think, people are happy about that win. I think people still look back at LSU and Bama and go, man, what could have been, right?
The LSU game was one they should have won. There's been a lot of officiating talk this year. I think that one gets called a little differently. Hey, and look, here's the thing. This is going to sound crazy, and I'm actually going to unpack a playoff scenario for you in a little bit. But I mean, they win that LSU game. They're a 2-loss team that I think has got a shot with what's ahead potentially.
They do. And then if you go a step further and you think about, they lost to Bama by 2 on the road. And, Ole Miss, that game, that's not a what if. Like, they lost that game.
Right.
And it wasn't particularly close, right? That's not one you put in the what if category, but you could realistically be looking at a 1-loss team, and then, you still got to finish out the year, right? Because you're going into game 8. You got A&M at home. You got to go to Clemson. That's not a conference game, but still, that's going to be a very difficult game. You got to go at Vandy. I mean, you've got Missouri at home, right? Like, you've got tough games left on the schedule, so there'd be a lot of work to do. But, man, you think about it, they would be sitting pretty. So,
well, I mean, I'm going to throw this at you. If they win out, which would include beating A&M, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Wofford, and Clemson, 2 of those on the road, you don't know how things are going to shake out. And look, I don't think they're going to win out, but I wouldn't have thought if you'd said, hey, Chris, we're approaching Halloween. You got Army, Navy, Vandy in Indiana in the top 25. I didn't see that coming either. So, I mean, just throw out all reason and logic and go from there. But, I mean, hey, if they were to run the table from here on out, I do think there is a scenario. I don't know if they can get in because it's 3 losses and they're not
Right.
Alabama or Georgia, but it would be interesting.
Well, the conversation would be, there'd probably be a conversation of should they get in.
Yeah.
Again, that's it. They may go lose on every other conference game and lose to Clemson, and then we might be sitting here next week saying, "Yeah, that was silly," to even talk
Right.
about that. But as it is, it's hard to tell week to week. I think there'd be a conversation of will they get in, right?
Yeah.
But I think the bigger conversation, because that's still, even if they win out, seems like a smaller chance, right? But the conversation, if they did win out and they're 9-3 and their only losses are, a really good Ole Miss team that may be in the playoff, Bama on the road by 2, and LSU at home by a field goal on the last play of the game, there would probably be a conversation of should they get it? Like, are
Yeah.
they good enough, right? And look, I do think with this team, nobody can argue that they can play with anybody. They've shown
Yeah.
that on the schedule. They didn't really play with Ole Miss. That one got out of hand. We know, Chris, from this year in the SEC, if you don't play well, you'll get blown out.
Yeah.
But all these teams are just so close to each other.
Yes.
I don't even know if we can sit here and say there's 2 or 3 teams that are head and shoulders above anybody.
There's
Like,
not.
I thought that at the beginning of the year. I don't think that anymore after we've seen 7 weeks of ball.
Yeah, I think it's like the NFL. You throw 2 names in a hat, pick them out at random, and there's a decent chance that any combination of things can happen that either could beat the other. I mean, when Alabama got beat by Vanderbilt, that just, to me, that opened up everything as a possibility, and that's kind of the way it's been. I mean, but yeah, I mean, this is a team that is gained 54 yards of total offense, beat Oklahoma 35-9. And it had 252 against Kentucky, won that one 31-6, both those on the road. I mean, that's the kind of year it's been in the league. That's the kind of year it's been for South Carolina. But the one thing you can count on is that defense. How good are they? I mean, I would think that you have to go back to vintage Spurrier, Clowney days.
Yeah. But
before you get to a defense, it was as good as the one they've got.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I mean, offenses have gotten even better since that era. For me, I think the 2012 South Carolina team was probably the best in school history. It was loaded on both sides of the ball. That team they had to play LSU on the road and had to play Florida on the road, and that was their 2 losses, and they didn't make the title game, and almost a shame because that team probably deserved to do it, right? But
yeah.
They were loaded on defense. You think about the defensive line with Clowney and Ingram and Devin Taylor and all those people. This defensive line, I think, is going to end up, there's going to be some comparisons, if not already, of are they as good or even better. They don't have Clowney on the line, but they can come at you in waves. Kyle Kennard's been a revelation. He's got 8.5 sacks this season. He had another one wiped off the board because South Carolina accepted a penalty. He has actually a shot to break Jadeveon Clowney's single season sack record, which is 13. They got Dylan Stewart as a 5-star freshman. They're at least 2 deep at tackle. They're deep at edge. They're very athletic at linebacker. And that's where it starts. When this team has gotten itself in trouble, they have given up some explosive plays. LSU is really good on offense. Garrett Nussmeier is really good. They caused some problems in the second half. They've let some runs pop out at times. Ole Miss was able to control that game more, but their scores, Chris, their touchdowns were all when they had the ball in very favorable field position. South Carolina side of the field, or the 41-yard line. They scored twice in that game. This isn't a defense that's very hard to go up and down the field on a consistent basis, right? They just wreak havoc. I mean, 9 sacks in a game by 9 different players. I don't care how struggling an offense is, the opposing offense, because Oklahoma definitely was. That's an impressive performance. And they can just do a lot of different things. They can show you different looks. They'll throw different looks at you. They can also just beat you one-on-one. And that's really helped their back end as well. O.D. Fortune's playing really good ball at corner. Nicky Emmanwori's been one of the best safeties in the country. He has, multiple pick sixes this season. He's played very, very well. So, yeah, it's a really good defense. They're talented, they're deep, and they have a lot of veterans. And I think all those things have combined to give them a really good unit there.
Well, I think the other thing they got, tell me if I'm missing here, because sometimes collegiate excellence does not translate to NFL. But I feel like you look at that roster: Dylan Stewart, Tonka Hemingway, Kyle Kennard, Debo Williams, Emmanwori, maybe DQ Smith, and probably a couple of those corners. I feel like there's a lot of those guys are going to be playing in the league.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, Demetrius Knight's another one. He had a great game. This is a kid who's a transfer from Charlotte, started his career at Georgia Tech. He's a grown man. I mean, he's literally a father. He's married, like he's experienced, but he's one of the fastest players on the team at his size. So, yeah, I mean, somebody asked me the other day, what's the record for how many draft picks South Carolina has? I want to say they've had 7 a couple times. This year's class could break that. TJ Sanders, he's a 4th-year guy, a redshirt guy. So he would have another year. He'll probably leave. Tonka, as you said, they have just on defense, you could list off 7, 8 guys where you go, those could be draft picks. And so, yeah, I mean, this is what happens, Chris, when you stack talent and you have depth and you have experience. Dylan Stewart's a young guy, but the rest of them have played a lot of ball in Columbia or at other schools. That matters, and that's added up for them. And they're really talented, and they're all playing very well together as a unit.
Chris, let's talk about Rocket Sanders. I don't always believe injury reports. I think we're getting more transparency than we've ever had, but that's a kid that's had some injury issues in the past. And anytime a guy drops off markedly in performance, I always suspect health is a reason. He's had some really good games and then some games where he's not much of a factor. I'm guessing that the health is kind of an on again thing with him.
Well, when he got to South Carolina, he had what did he have? He had the knee at Arkansas and then shoulder, and then he had shoulder surgery this offseason. And he was pretty much full go coming into the year. He did get set back because he missed, not that he would have played a ton, but in the Akron game, he sprained his ankle, looked pretty bad. So he was able, because they had a bye week, to get to the next week to play against Ole Miss. Now, I think that limited him, right? Where he was kind of on a pitch count, a snap count that next week. He looked pretty healthy to me in the last game on the road against Oklahoma. Not to say that he's 100%, I don't know for sure, but didn't look like he had any lingering effects. I think the biggest thing with Rocket, honestly, has just been, while South Carolina's found some success in the run game, they've just been inconsistent there, right? Up front, blocking, perimeter blocking. They've had a lot of negative plays. They've given up sacks. And so it's been inconsistent. It's been inefficient offensively. So I think that's the biggest thing, although there has been, a health question for a little stretch of this season.
I want to ask you about LaNorris Sellers. I'm looking, the first game, he's 10 of 23 passing. Since then, he's been above 56% every game. Now, look, I think those are probably short throws that are easy completions because he's eclipsed 200 yards passing once. That was the Alabama game. So that to me points to play calling and having him do things that are within his wheelhouse, which also includes running. But what's his ceiling the rest of the season? I would think you can't quite turn him loose. He's not a guy that's played a lot of football at this level, but he can certainly do some things, especially with being so big and so fast and being a headache to bring down on the open field.
Well, it's like Shane Beamer said the other day, at the beginning of the year, you could say, hey, we've got some youth because we got a freshman left tackle, a redshirt freshman quarterback. You can't say that anymore.
Right.
It's time to grow up. Now, he's not saying LaNorris Sellers is right now what he should be as a senior. That's obviously not the case. But you can see the growth from game one to what he just did. The biggest thing, Chris, was the turnovers, right? Even though you could see the growth from week to week of him looking more comfortable and making more plays, he at one point before the Oklahoma game, he led the nation in fumbles, and there were a couple more that could have gone the other way, like in the Kentucky game. So you could see the growth there. Right now, he'll have to sustain it the rest of the year. But against Oklahoma, he only put the ball in danger once, a ball that frankly should have been picked on the sideline, but it wasn't. Didn't have really any turnover worthy plays other than that. So, he's still young. So seeing the field, being able to know when to just live to fight another day, take a sack, know when to scramble out, and then the ball security. Those are really the three things that I think he's got to continue working on.
Yeah.
All fixable though, right? Because
Yeah.
you don't look at LaNorris Sellers and say he can't do this or that. The ceiling is super high for his career, and I think he's got room to get better the rest of the season too.
Well, and Chris, and this will be the last thing. You listen to the way that Shane Beamer has talked about him, in this era of transfer portal and guys doing this and that and opting out. It seems like the between the ears and the leadership part is exactly what you'd want of your quarterback if you trust Shane Beamer on that. And I tend to trust Shane Beamer on those things.
Well, and this is, it's a dream scenario, right? It's a kid from South Carolina who's not a transfer. He's a redshirt freshman. You got him for multiple years, and he's super talented. And you know how it is playing quarterback in the SEC. People are very unrealistic.
Yeah.
But they also say things like, put in the young guy, live with the mistakes. That's kind of what you got with Sellers, right? You've got a young guy, super talented. And I think people were very unfair. It was fine, I think, to point out, hey, he's got to get better with the ball security. But we had some fans here, Chris, probably a smaller segment. He's not a quarterback. He's not. And it was just silly stuff that I think is going to end up looking even sillier as his career progresses. He's super talented. He's there. We knew there'd be some growing pains. Some of those have been a little bit more extensive than we thought, but I think he's shown more growth in certain areas than you would have anticipated this early too.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a different world. It used to be 10, 15 years ago, you built a program, you had your guy, and everybody just understood as a freshman, he's going to take his lumps. The portal has really upset that development curve and made it harder, I think, on situations like LaNorris Sellers, because it goes wrong for a game or two and everybody's screaming, hey, hit the portal and find another guy.
Yep. It's really bad. But, I think high school recruiting is still very important. You got a homegrown guy like that. I think that'll take care of itself. Everybody in the building's behind him. And I think most of the fans are as well. And, I think he's only going to get better and better.
Hey, Chris, thanks for your time today. I know you're super busy. Tell folks where they can find your coverage and what's coming up.
Yeah, check us out, GamecockCentral.com. We got recruiting, of course, all the time, in-depth coverage of the football team as they continue through the season. So come on over and check us out there.
All right. He's Chris Clark of Gamecock Central. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 16. Thanks for watching our content. Hit the subscribe button and the like button. That helps our analytics. We do baseball, football, basketball year-round. And Caroline.Smith at Southeastern14.com if you're interested in advertising. Thanks for watching Southeastern 16 presented by Bet Online.